When we think of the Middle Ages in the British Isles, we often imagine a world divided: Anglo-Saxons here, Celts there, Norse invaders up north, Normans sweeping in from the south. And while there's truth in these broad strokes, what we often miss is just how linguistically rich and entangled medieval Britain really was. Let's begin with Old English, spoken primarily in Anglo-Saxon England before the Norman conquest of 1066. It was a Germanic language, but even by the 9th and 10th centuries, it had already absorbed elements from Old Norse, thanks to the Viking incursions and settlements in the Danelaw. You see, Old Norse and Old English were mutually intelligible to a degree. Think of them as dialects with enough overlap for basic communication, especially in trade and governance. It's no coincidence that some of our most common English words today, a sky, egg, knife, they, them, are Norse in origin. Now, while that was happening in the east and north, the western and northern fringes, Scotland, Wales, Cornwall, and Ireland, retained their Celtic tongues. Welsh, Cornish, Bretons across the Channel, Irish Gaelic, and later Scots Gaelic all persisted with vigour. These weren't rustic languages either, they had literary traditions, poetic forms, legal codes. In fact, medieval Welsh poetry was among the most sophisticated in Europe. And let's not forget Latin, the lingua franca of the church, of scholarship, and of law. If you were literate in the Middle Ages, chances are you could read Latin, regardless of your mother tongue. Then comes the great linguistic rupture of 1066. With William the Conqueror, Norman French becomes the language of the court, of administration, of the upper classes. For several centuries, England was effectively trilingual. The nobility spoke French, the clergy and scholars used Latin, and the common folk held on to English, though that English was changing rapidly under the influence of both French and Norse. Imagine living in a city like York or London during the 12th century. You might hear legal proclamations in Latin, market haggling in a dialect of Middle English tinged with Norse, and overhear aristocrats chatting in French as they pass by. The boundaries weren't clean, but the interactions were constant, and that's the heart of medieval multilingualism: constant negotiation, borrowing, code switching, and creativity. So no, medieval Britain wasn't a monolingual island. It was a dynamic, multilingual landscape, layered with identity, power, and history.